I was sitting at my kitchen table in my Cedar Rapids, Iowa home when I heard the sharp knock on the door that would change my entire winter. It was mid-October, and I had just finished installing my storm windows the weekend before, a ritual I had performed every fall for the past 5 years since buying this house. The double-paned additions were essential for surviving Iowa winters, where temperatures regularly dropped below zero, and the wind chill could make it feel like the surface of an ice planet. Through the frosted glass of my front door, I could see a woman with a blonde bob haircut and oversized sunglasses despite the overcast day. I opened the door to find her clutching a clipboard like it was the Bible itself, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Can I help you?" I asked, already knowing this was going to be trouble. I had seen this woman at neighborhood meetings, always the first to complain about minor infractions and the last to leave after she had made sure everyone knew about her grievances. "Mr. Tyler Zimmerman," she said, not waiting for my confirmation. "I am Patricia Henderson, the new president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I need to discuss a violation with you immediately." I leaned against the door frame. "What violation?" "Your storm windows," she said, gesturing dramatically at my house like I had installed neon signs instead of weather protection. "They are not in compliance with our aesthetic guidelines." Section 4.7 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that all window modifications must maintain the original architectural appearance of the home. I blinked at her. "These are storm windows. They have been on my house every winter since I moved in. Nobody has said anything before." "Well, I am saying something now," Patricia snapped. "The previous board was far too lenient. I am bringing standards back to this neighborhood. You have 14 days to remove them, or you will be fined $500, with an additional $250 per week until compliance is achieved." "You understand how cold it gets here," I said, feeling my patience already wearing thin. "These windows keep my heating bills reasonable. Without them, I am going to be paying through the nose just to keep my pipes from freezing." Patricia adjusted her sunglasses and looked at me with the kind of condescension usually reserved for children who did not understand why they could not have candy for dinner. "That is not the HOA's concern, Mr. Zimmerman. Maintaining property values is our priority. Those windows are an eyesore and they need to go." "An eyesore? They are transparent pieces of glass that protect the original windows underneath. You can barely see them." "I can see them perfectly well," she said, making a note on her clipboard. 14 days. "The notice will be in your mailbox by this evening. Good day." She turned on her heel and marched back to her silver Mercedes, leaving me standing in my doorway wondering if I had somehow slipped into an alternate dimension where common sense had been outlawed. I closed the door and walked back to my kitchen, where my coffee had gone cold. I had bought this house specifically because the HOA had seemed reasonable at the time. The fees were modest, the rules were basic, and everyone seemed content to mind their own business. But apparently, Patricia Henderson had decided to turn Meadowbrook Estates into her personal fiefdom. I spent the next hour digging through my copy of the HOA bylaws, a thrilling document I had skimmed exactly once during the closing process. Section 4.7 was indeed about window modifications, but it was vague enough to be interpreted in multiple ways. The language talked about maintaining the original character of the homes, but it said nothing specific about storm windows. The entire section seemed designed to prevent people from installing something truly bizarre, like stained glass or blackout shutters, not practical weather protection. That evening, I found the official notice in my mailbox, printed on HOA letterhead with my name misspelled. The letter was worse than Patricia's verbal threat. It cited not just Section 4.7, but also claimed my storm windows violated Section 3.2 regarding unauthorized structural modifications. Storm windows were not structural. They were attached with clips and could be removed in minutes. This was absurd. I called my neighbor Mark, who had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade. He answered on the third ring, sounding distracted. "Hey, Tyler, what's up? Did you get a visit from Patricia Henderson today?" he groaned. "No, but I heard she was making rounds. What did she want?" "She is demanding I remove my storm windows. Apparently they are ruining the neighborhood aesthetic." Mark laughed, then stopped when he realized I was serious. "Wait, she is really going after storm windows? That is insane. Half the houses here have them." "Not anymore, apparently." "She gave me 14 days or I start getting fined." "That woman is out of control," Mark said. "She has been president for 3 months and she has already tried to ban basketball hoops, regulate what colors we can paint our mailboxes, and she sent my wife a nastagram about our garden gnome." "Our garden gnome, Tyler. It was my daughter's birthday present." "What did you do about it?" "We moved the gnome to the backyard. It was not worth the fight, but storm windows, that is different. That is going to cost you real money in heating bills." "I know. I am trying to decide if I should fight this or just comply and freeze all winter." Mark was quiet for a moment. "You should come to the next HOA meeting. It is next Tuesday. If enough of us push back, maybe we can vote her out or at least put some limits on her power trip." I thanked Mark and hung up, but I was not optimistic. HOA politics were notorious for being dominated by whoever had the most free time and the strongest opinions. Most homeowners just wanted to live their lives without dealing with petty bureaucracy. That apathy was exactly how people like Patricia Henderson ended up in charge. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of research and frustration. I consulted with a lawyer friend who confirmed that, while the HOA had the legal right to enforce their bylaws, the bylaws themselves could be challenged if they were unreasonable or arbitrarily enforced. The problem was that fighting an HOA in court was expensive and time-consuming, and there was no guarantee of winning. I attended the Tuesday meeting, held in the community center at the entrance of our neighborhood. About 20 people showed up, which was actually a decent turnout. Patricia sat at the front table with 2 other board members, both of whom looked uncomfortable with her aggressive leadership style. The meeting started with financial reports and maintenance updates, all delivered in Patricia's clipped, authoritative tone. When we reached the open forum section, I raised my hand. "Yes, Mr. Zimmerman," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false politeness. I stood up. "I want to discuss the recent enforcement of Section 4.7 regarding my storm windows. I have had these windows installed every winter for 5 years without issue. They are a practical necessity for managing heating costs in Iowa winters. I think this enforcement is unreasonable, and I would like the board to reconsider." A few people nodded in agreement. Patricia's expression did not change. "The rules are the rules, Mr. Zimmerman. If we make exceptions for you, we have to make exceptions for everyone. Before you know it, we will have a neighborhood that looks like a trailer park." I felt my face flush. Storm windows do not make a neighborhood look like a trailer park. They make it look like people have common sense. "Your opinion is noted," Patricia said dismissively. "Next item." "Wait," said a woman I recognized as living 3 streets over. "I have storm windows too." "Are you going to make me remove mine?" Patricia consulted her clipboard. "Mrs. Chen, you are next on my list, actually. You will be receiving your notice tomorrow." The room erupted in protests. Apparently, at least half the people present had storm windows, and none of them were happy about the prospect of removing them. Patricia banged a gavel I had not noticed before, demanding order like she was presiding over a court instead of a neighborhood meeting. "This is exactly the problem," Patricia said loudly. "Too many people doing whatever they want with no regard for community standards. I was elected to bring order and consistency, and that is what I am going to do. All storm windows must be removed by the end of the month. No exceptions." "Nobody elected you to freeze us out of our homes," someone shouted from the back. The meeting devolved into chaos after that, with people yelling over each other and Patricia banging her gavel repeatedly. Eventually, she adjourned the meeting early, citing disrespectful behavior and storming out with her clipboard. I left the community center feeling defeated. It was clear that Patricia was not going to back down, and rallying enough homeowners to vote her out would take months. Winter was coming much faster than that. On the morning of the 14th day, I stood in my driveway with a ladder and a screwdriver, staring up at my storm windows. The temperature had already dropped into the 30s overnight, and the forecast predicted our first snow within the week. This was insane, but I was also pragmatic. I could not afford the fines, not with the holidays coming up and a car payment still hanging over my head. I spent 3 hours carefully removing each storm window, cleaning them and storing them in my garage. The house looked exactly the same afterward, which only reinforced how pointless this entire exercise was. That night, I noticed the difference immediately. Even with my thermostat set at its normal temperature, the house felt drafty and cold. I could feel the chill radiating from the windows, and the furnace seemed to be running constantly. I wrapped myself in a blanket on the couch and tried not to think about what my next heating bill was going to look like. The bill arrived 3 weeks later, and I actually gasped when I opened it. $367 more than the previous November. $367 because Patricia Henderson thought storm windows were ugly. I took a photo of the bill and sent it to Mark, along with a message asking if his bill had increased too. He responded within minutes that his had gone up over $250, and he was furious. That evening, I drafted a formal complaint to the HOA board, documenting the cost increase and arguing that the storm window ban was causing financial hardship without any meaningful benefit to the community. I requested that the board reverse the policy and reimburse affected homeowners for the increased heating costs. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to try. Patricia's response arrived by certified mail 3 days later. It was a single page that essentially told me to pound sand. The board had reviewed my complaint and determined that compliance with community standards was more important than individual financial concerns. She also reminded me that I had agreed to follow all HOA rules when I purchased my home, and that continuing to dispute the board's decisions could result in additional penalties. That threat was what pushed me over the edge. I was not going to let Patricia Henderson bankrupt me with her power trip. If she wanted a fight, I would give her one. I started by requesting copies of all HOA board meeting minutes from the past year, which I was legally entitled to as a homeowner. I also requested the HOA's financial records, enforcement logs, and any communications related to the storm window policy. Iowa law required HOAs to provide these documents within 10 business days, but Patricia dragged her feet, claiming she needed more time to compile everything. While I waited, I started talking to other homeowners who had been targeted by Patricia's increasingly bizarre enforcement actions. Mrs. Chen had been fined for having her trash cans visible from the street, even though trash day was the next morning. A young couple had been cited for parking their work van in their own driveway because it had a company logo on the side. Another neighbor had received a violation for having a wreath on their door that was too large, according to Patricia's interpretation of the rules. Every single person I talked to had a horror story, and most of them had simply paid the fines or complied with the demands because fighting seemed too exhausting. But the heating bill situation was different. That was not a minor aesthetic issue. That was forcing people to choose between following HOA rules and keeping their families warm in an Iowa winter. I created a spreadsheet documenting everyone's increased heating costs. By the time I was done, I had data from 17 households, with increases ranging from $180 to over $400. The total was nearly $5,000 in extra heating costs, all because Patricia thought storm windows were an eyesore. Armed with this data, I reached out to a local newspaper reporter I had met at a community event earlier that year. Her name was Jessica Norton, and she covered local government and community issues. I sent her an email explaining the situation and attaching my spreadsheet. She called me the next morning. "This is exactly the kind of story people need to hear about," Jessica said, her excitement palpable through the phone. HOA overreach is a huge problem, and most of it goes unreported because people feel helpless. Would you and some of your neighbors be willing to go on record? I checked with Mark, Mrs. Chen, and a few others. Everyone agreed. We were done being pushed around. Jessica's article ran on the front page of the local section 3 days later. Meadowbrook HOA forces homeowners to choose between rules and heating bills, was the headline, accompanied by a photo of my house showing the barely visible difference between where the storm windows had been and where they were not. The article laid out everything: Patricia's aggressive enforcement, the cost increases, the complaints that had been ignored, and the growing frustration among homeowners. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The newspaper's website crashed from the traffic. The story was picked up by the local TV news stations, and by that evening, I had reporters calling me for interviews. Social media exploded with people sharing their own HOA horror stories, and suddenly, Meadowbrook Estates was famous for all the wrong reasons. Patricia did not take it well. She sent an email to all homeowners calling the article defamatory and threatening legal action against anyone who had participated. She claimed the reporter had taken things out of context and that the board was simply trying to maintain property values. She also announced that she was increasing the HOA fees by $20 per month to cover legal expenses related to defending the board's reputation. That was her biggest mistake. You could push people around on minor things, but threatening to raise their fees while also making their heating bills skyrocket was too much. Within 24 hours, I had over 40 homeowners signed onto a petition demanding an emergency meeting to vote on Patricia's removal. The Iowa HOA laws were actually pretty clear on this. If 30% of homeowners requested a special meeting, the board had to schedule one within 30 days. We had well over that threshold, so Patricia had no choice but to comply, no matter how much she wanted to ignore us. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday morning, 3 weeks later. The community center was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. Local TV cameras were set up in the back, and I recognized Jessica Norton sitting in the front row with her notebook. Patricia sat at the board table looking like she had been sucking on lemons. The other 2 board members, Frank and Dorothy, looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. I did not blame them. They had probably signed up for board duty thinking it would mean approving paint colors and organizing the annual picnic, not dealing with a dictator in suburban clothing. I had been chosen to present the case for Patricia's removal mostly because I had organized the petition and collected the data. I stood up when called and walked to the front of the room, my hands shaking slightly. Public speaking had never been my strength, but anger was a powerful motivator. "I am going to keep this simple," I started. "Patricia Henderson has, in less than 6 months as HOA president, cost this community thousands of dollars, created an atmosphere of fear and resentment, and prioritized her personal aesthetic preferences over the practical needs of homeowners. The storm window situation alone has cost 17 families nearly $5,000 in increased heating costs. She has issued fines for things like garden gnomes and wreaths. She has threatened homeowners with legal action for speaking to the press. And now she wants to raise our fees to pay for lawyers to defend her decisions." I held up the spreadsheet. "This is not what an HOA is supposed to do. We are supposed to maintain common areas, enforce reasonable standards, and build community. Instead, we have a president who treats this neighborhood like her personal kingdom and treats all of us like subjects who need to obey her every whim." The room erupted in applause. Patricia's face turned red, and she grabbed the microphone. "This is a witch hunt," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I have done everything by the book. Every single rule I have enforced is written in the bylaws that every homeowner agreed to follow. If people do not like the rules, they should not have bought homes in an HOA community. The bylaws are supposed to be interpreted reasonably," I shot back. "Nowhere in Section 4.7 does it specifically ban storm windows. You have chosen to interpret vague language in the most extreme way possible, and you have ignored the practical consequences of your decisions." Frank, one of the other board members, cleared his throat. "Actually, Patricia, I have been meaning to bring this up. I have reviewed the bylaws extensively, and I do not think the storm window ban is supported by the actual text. I voted against it at the board meeting, if you recall." Patricia glared at him. "You were outvoted. By you and Dorothy. And Dorothy told me privately that she only voted yes because you convinced her it was about maintaining standards. She did not realize it would cause this much hardship." Dorothy, a sweet elderly woman who had been on the board for years, nodded sadly. "I did not think it through. Patricia was so convincing and I trusted her judgment. I am sorry." The vote was called shortly after that. It was not even close. 47 homeowners voted to remove Patricia as president, with only 3 votes against. Patricia stood up, grabbed her clipboard, and walked out without another word. The community center fell silent as the door slammed behind her. Frank was appointed interim president, and his first act was to repeal the storm window ban. He also announced that the board would be reviewing all of Patricia's enforcement actions from the past 6 months to determine which fines should be refunded. The room erupted in applause again, and for the first time in months I felt like I could breathe. But the story did not end there. 2 weeks after Patricia's removal, I was reinstalling my storm windows when Mark came jogging over from his house, his phone in his hand. "You are not going to believe this," he said, slightly out of breath. "What now? Patricia has been arrested." I nearly dropped the window I was holding. "For what?" Mark held up his phone, showing me a news article. "Embezzlement." Apparently, after she was removed, Frank did a deep dive into the HOA finances. Patricia had been approving payments to a consulting company for the past 5 months. Guess who owned the consulting company? No way. She was paying herself over $3,000 a month for consulting services that never actually happened. The cops are calling it embezzlement and fraud. She could be looking at serious prison time. I sat down on my front steps, stunned. Patricia had not just been a power-hungry HOA president. She had been a criminal. using her position to funnel HOA funds into her own pocket. No wonder she had been so aggressive about fines and fee increases. She was treating the HOA like her personal piggy bank. The investigation expanded over the following weeks. It turned out Patricia had also been accepting kickbacks from contractors she hired for HOA maintenance work, inflating invoices and pocketing the difference. The total amount she had stolen was estimated at over $40,000. The story made regional news, and Meadowbrook Estates became famous again, this time for being the neighborhood that took down a corrupt HOA president. Patricia's arrest happened on a cold December morning. I was not there to see it, but several neighbors were, and the Ring doorbell footage made the rounds on our neighborhood social media group. She had answered the door in her bathrobe, and her expression of shock when the police told her why they were there was priceless. She tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that the consulting payments were legitimate, but the paper trail was damning. She had not even been smart about covering her tracks. The legal process moved surprisingly quickly. Patricia's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was not interested. The amount she had stolen, combined with the number of victims, made it a serious case. The trial was scheduled for March. In the meantime, Frank worked overtime to repair the damage Patricia had caused. He issued refunds for all the fines related to storm windows, garden gnomes, and other aesthetic violations that had no real basis in the bylaws. He also set up a committee to review and clarify the HOA rules, making sure they were reasonable and clearly written so that no future board president could abuse vague language the way Patricia had. My heating bill returned to normal in December after I reinstalled the storm windows. That $367 difference had been refunded by the HOA, along with a formal apology from the board. It was not much in the grand scheme of things, but it felt like justice. The trial started on a blustery March afternoon. Several homeowners, including me, were called as witnesses to provide context about Patricia's behavior and the financial impact of her decisions. The prosecution argued that Patricia had systematically abused her position for personal gain, and that her aggressive enforcement of petty rules had been designed to distract from her embezzlement. Patricia's defense was weak. Her lawyer tried to argue that the consulting payments were legitimate compensation for her time as president, but the HOA bylaws were clear that board members served as volunteers. He also tried to claim that the kickback scheme was normal business practice, which did not go over well with the jury. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Patricia was found guilty on multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and theft. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA. She was also banned from serving on any HOA or community organization board for life. I was sitting in the courtroom when the sentence was read. Patricia's face crumbled, and for the first time since I had met her, she looked genuinely defeated. Part of me felt sorry for her. She had thrown away her freedom and her reputation over what amounted to a glorified neighborhood club. But then, I remembered how she had treated people, how she had caused real financial hardship for families just trying to keep their homes warm, and that sympathy evaporated. After the trial, Jessica Norton wrote a follow-up article about the case. It became one of her most read pieces, and she later told me it had sparked a broader conversation about HOA reform in Iowa. Several state legislators started discussing new laws to increase oversight of HOA boards and make it easier for homeowners to challenge unreasonable rules. I even testified at a committee hearing in Des Moines, sharing my experience with the storm windows and the financial impact of Patricia's decisions. The hearing was surreal. I sat at a table in front of a room full of legislators, talking about storm windows and heating bills like they were matters of state importance. But the committee members took it seriously. They asked thoughtful questions about how HOAs could balance maintaining community standards with respecting homeowner autonomy. Several of them shared their own HOA horror stories, which made me feel better about not being alone in this struggle. The resulting legislation, which passed later that year, required HOAs to provide clear justification for any rule that could result in significant financial hardship for homeowners. It also established a state-level HOA ombudsman office where homeowners could file complaints about unreasonable enforcement. It was not perfect, but it was a start. Back in Meadowbrook Estates, life slowly returned to normal. Frank served out the rest of Patricia's term as president and then declined to run for re-election, saying he had earned a break from HOA drama. A retired teacher named Susan took over, and her approach was refreshingly reasonable. She focused on actual community building, organizing events and maintaining common areas, rather than obsessing over whether someone's mailbox was the wrong shade of black. I kept my storm windows up through the winter, and nobody said a word about them. The following fall, when October rolled around again, I installed them without a second thought. They went up smoothly, and my heating bills stayed reasonable. It was amazing how simple life could be when people just applied common sense. Mark and I became closer friends through the whole ordeal. We started a tradition of having a beer together every few weeks, usually on his back porch where the infamous garden gnome now held a place of honor. We joked about writing a book called Surviving Your HOA, but neither of us had the energy to relive that stress in that much detail. Mrs. Chen, who had been one of the first to join my petition, baked me cookies every Christmas afterward. She called me her hero, which was embarrassing but sweet. I told her I had just been trying to keep my heating bill down, but she insisted that standing up to bullies was always heroic, no matter the motivation. The house across the street from me went up for sale the following spring. During the open house, I saw the real estate agent carefully explaining the HOA situation to potential buyers, emphasizing that the board was under new management and had learned from past mistakes. The house sold quickly to a young family with 2 kids, and they later told me that the transparent handling of the HOA drama had actually made them more confident about buying in the neighborhood, not less. They figured any community that could recognize and fix its problems was worth joining. I ran into Patricia's husband once at the grocery store about 6 months after the trial. He looked tired and sad, and I almost pretended not to see him to save us both the awkwardness. But he approached me directly. "I wanted to apologize," he said quietly. "I had no idea what she was doing. I am not trying to make excuses, but she kept all the HOA stuff separate from me. I thought she was just really invested in the neighborhood. I did not know what to say to that. I appreciate you telling me. The house is going into foreclosure," he continued. "Between the restitution and the legal fees, we are wiped out. I am moving in with my brother in Wisconsin. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in my family is like her." We shook hands and he walked away. I stood there in the cereal aisle for a long moment, thinking about how one person's bad decisions could ripple out and hurt so many people, including their own family. That summer, Meadowbrook Estates held its annual neighborhood picnic. It was the biggest turnout anyone could remember, with families crowding around the pool and kids running wild on the playground. Susan gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition and promising that the board was committed to serving the community, not controlling it. People actually applauded. I brought potato salad and spent most of the afternoon playing cornhole with Mark and some of the other neighbors I had gotten to know through the whole storm window debacle. We did not talk about Patricia or the trial or any of that mess. We just enjoyed the sunshine and the fact that we could all relax in our own neighborhood without worrying about violation notices. As the sun started to set and people began packing up, I looked around at the rows of houses, many of which now had storm windows installed without anyone batting an eye. It was such a simple thing, really. Practical protection against the Iowa winter. But it had become a symbol of something larger. The idea that rules should serve people, not the other way around. I thought about that first knock on my door, Patricia standing there with her clipboard and her attitude, telling me I had to remove something that made my life better because she did not like how it looked. I thought about how close I had come to just accepting it, to taking down the windows and paying those inflated heating bills because fighting seemed too hard. But I had fought, and we had won. Not just against Patricia, but against the idea that homeowners were powerless against their HOAs. We had proven that communities could push back against unreasonable rules, that people could organize and demand accountability, and that even entrenched power structures could be changed when enough people decided they had had enough. The restitution payments came in slowly over the next 2 years. Patricia paid what she could from prison work programs, which was not much. The HOA eventually recovered about 60% of what she had stolen through a combination of her payments and insurance claims. It was not perfect, but it was enough to replenish the reserve fund and give everyone some sense of closure. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia was released early for good behavior after serving 3 years. She moved out of state immediately, probably wanting to escape the infamy she had created. I hoped she had learned something from the experience, but I honestly did not care. She was no longer my problem. The Iowa HOA reform legislation proved to be more impactful than anyone expected. Within a year of its passage, dozens of homeowners across the state filed complaints about unreasonable enforcement actions. The Ombudsman office was swamped, but effective, mediating disputes and forcing HOA boards to justify their decisions. Several boards were investigated for financial irregularities, and a few more corrupt presidents were prosecuted. Our story had apparently opened a floodgate. Jessica Norton won a state journalism award for her coverage of the Meadowbrook HOA scandal. She called me when she got the news, excited and grateful. "You gave me the story of my career," she said, "and you helped change things for thousands of homeowners. That is incredible." I did not feel incredible. I felt like a guy who had just wanted to keep his heating bill down and had stumbled into something much bigger. But I guess that is how a lot of change happens. Someone has to be willing to stand up and say, "This is wrong," even when it is scary and uncertain. 3 years after the storm window controversy, I was elected to the HOA board. I had not planned on it, but Susan asked me to run when another member moved away. She said the board needed someone who understood the importance of reasonable enforcement and who would not forget what it felt like to be on the receiving end of HOA overreach. I agreed, with some reluctance. Board meetings were boring, and dealing with neighborhood disputes was rarely fun. But I figured I owed it to the community that had stood with me during the fight against Patricia. And I wanted to make sure that what happened to us never happened again. My first board meeting was in November, exactly 4 years after Patricia had knocked on my door. We discussed upcoming snow removal, holiday decoration guidelines, and a request from a new homeowner who wanted to install solar panels. The solar panel discussion took up most of the meeting. Some board members worried about aesthetic consistency, while others argued that environmental benefits should take precedence. I listened to both sides, then spoke up. I think we need to ask ourselves if this is going to cause real harm to the community, or if we are just uncomfortable with change. Solar panels are becoming standard in a lot of neighborhoods. If we ban them, we are going to look outdated and unreasonable. And more importantly, we will be stopping someone from making an environmentally and financially smart decision for their home. The board voted to allow the solar panels with some minor placement guidelines. The homeowner was thrilled, and I felt good about the decision. It was a small thing, but it represented a different philosophy. We were there to help the community function, not to micromanage people's lives. I served on the board for 2 terms, 6 years total. During that time, we updated the bylaws to be clearer and more reasonable, established better financial controls to prevent another embezzlement situation, and worked to build actual community rather than just enforce rules. We started a neighborhood watch program, organized quarterly social events, and created a welcome committee for new residents. Meadowbrook Estates became a genuinely nice place to live. People looked out for each other. Kids played together. The social media group was full of friendly posts about found pets and recommendations for contractors, rather than complaints about violations. It was what an HOA was supposed to be. I eventually stepped down from the board when my job required more travel. By then, the culture had shifted enough that I felt confident leaving it in others' hands. The board had a waiting list of people who wanted to serve, which was a good sign. When people wanted to be involved rather than trying to avoid it, you knew you had a healthy community. Now, 5 years after that knock on my door, I am sitting in my warm, comfortable house, looking out through my storm windows at the snow falling outside. My heating bill last month was right where it should be, reasonable and predictable. The storm windows are doing their job, just like they always have. I still get angry when I think about what Patricia tried to do, how she used her tiny bit of power to make people's lives harder for no good reason. But mostly I feel grateful that we were able to stop her, to fix the system, and to create something better. The experience taught me a lot about standing up for yourself, about the importance of community, and about how even small battles can have big consequences. It taught me that rules without reason are just tyranny in disguise, and that the people who make the rules need to be accountable to the people who have to live by them. I never expected that storm windows would become the hill I would die on. But in retrospect, I am glad they were. Because it was not really about the windows. It was about the principle that your home should be yours, that you should not have to choose between following arbitrary rules and living comfortably, and that no one should have unchecked power over their neighbors. Those principles matter. They matter in HOAs, they matter in local government, they matter everywhere that people have to live and work together. And sometimes, defending those principles starts with something as simple as refusing to remove your storm windows. My story made the rounds on social media and HOA reform websites for years afterward. Every winter, I would get emails from strangers facing similar situations, asking for advice on how to fight their own HOA battles. I always responded, sharing what I had learned and encouraging them to stand up for themselves. Some of them won their battles, some did not. But all of them said that just knowing someone else had been through it and survived made them feel less alone. That was worth something. I still live in Meadowbrook Estates. I have thought about moving, especially when job opportunities in other cities came up, but this place is home now. We have built something good here, something worth keeping. And every winter, when I install my storm windows without a second thought, I am reminded of how far we have come and how important it is to never take common sense for granted. The storm windows are up now, doing their job, keeping my house warm and my heating bills low. Through them, I can see the neighborhood I helped save from a petty tyrant, the neighbors who stood with me, and the community we built together. It is not perfect, but it is ours, and it works. And that, in the end, is all I ever wanted.